I'm Stephanie Stack.
I'm Courtney Cam.
I'm Isaac.
Olivia.
I'm Alex.
All right, last one. Let's go. So, as a group, briefly outline the basic tenets of Crawford's argument in The World Beyond Your Head on becoming an individual in the age of distraction. In particular, but not limited to, explain why the world of things, other people, and history are necessary for becoming an individual, and how technology can help or hinder this process. Answers should in part address the relationship between contingency and the adult will. Finally, bring Cardinal Sarah into this conversation. Is Crawford's argument an adequate solution to the attention crisis, or is developing a relationship with silence also necessary for solving a problem? All right, so that's gonna take an hour to discuss. But, sorry, I just have this timer, but where do we want to start?
I guess we can kind of start with like the attention crisis. Like that's what he says, like right off the bat.
Yeah.
Is that we have an attention crisis as a society, and specifically like we're just sporadically in our devices, just going about our day, like not really aware of what's going on around us. So then he also mentions like not to multitask, like our habits of attention like are so crazy, like it would be impossible to actually be able to be productive when we multitask. So just to sit down, get it done, one thing at a time, and just be all of your attention into it.
And like, and it kind of ties in Sarah's argument right there, because in effect we're like silencing everything that's around us to focus on one central thing, because if we don't have that and we have all of the noise that's going on around us, we'll never be able to actually focus. And in that focus is where we build like habits, which again, it's not like easy to do, but the more that we build those habits, obviously like the more you do something, I think it's like 21 days of repetition makes a habit. So like it's in working towards it that you can get closer to like finding that like attention that we need.
But do we think like Sarah's silence is kind of different from that of Crawford's?
Oh, definitely.
I mean, like hers is mostly focused on, it kind of sounds more like doing nothing. Maybe that's not what they're trying to get at.
Yeah.
But like for Crawford, I guess silence is like finding silence and peace in that activity that
Right.
you're doing.
Right.
So when he talks about like the cook and being a machine and like using, like, how does he refer to it? Those jigs to like make things work so that there is no silence and you can just like move throughout and stuff. But then I guess with like Sarah, it's like, so I guess in that there is some like reflection, but for Sarah, the reflection's kind of a different aspect.
It's like a religious thing.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a little more.
It's like,
So
Crawford's is kind of like, we have all these distractions right with technology and stuff. And if we just put our focus on one like activity of us just doing, then we could like, what's it called? If we just focus, we could move past almost like, I'm trying to think of the word, wait. Sorry, just kidding. I love those.
He also discusses like the dependence on others and stuff, like the need for those relationships within others. And then like even with like the background jigs and stuff, like somebody had to do something to like work with that and stuff, like to make that work. And so yeah, I guess there's just trying to think of what else to say. So like it ties in with that idea of like experience more so. And then, I think this, yeah.
It's kind of like that whole situated self thing too, and like pushing past like, we have like the postmodern notion, like our self isn't determined, so although we're with humans and rely on that relationship, it's not necessarily like determined by being with those people. And we kind of talked about like how intellect is reason, spirit is emotions, empathy is what makes us different. And so like focusing in on all of those is how we can like pretty much accomplish what he's trying to get us to.
I think he also mentions that by sitting down and focusing all of our attention on that, we also develop our judgment, and with the judgment also comes like values and moral qualities.
Yes, I think like the whole point of that, like silence and leisure, is to like develop your humanness almost, kind of like working towards being, instead of being distracted and like kind of like the zombie thing, and just doing whatever. It's like, okay, I'm doing this, and this is developing like me being a human in a way.
And that's kind of where we fit into like that situated self in the world, because when we find what we're looking for in that. It's like it all comes from what we've grown up in, so it's kind of like the whole we're wrapped in the concepts of language, of culture, of social environment, because that's how we truly like understand ourselves, and everyone's situated self is going to be different because of the context that they're in. And so it's like that idea that we talked about, like you have to think contextually, because even with us, although we all are using the same language, and I mean contextually we're in the same class, like our experience with the class has been different because we're coming into it with like a different previous knowledge, and different goals of like what we want to get out of the class.
And I think that's
Yeah.
like what's so important like about his notion of individuality. It's like more so like how am I different than, or I mean it's more so what is best for me rather than like how am I different than other people.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to, yeah, like, just kind of going into like born into like, a societal environment and stuff, so I guess like with that thing about, like how like character develops, like how, which is like kind of going along with like how one responds to contingency and necessity, and it's like those experiences, like he discusses like the adult and stuff, and it's because they're like more mature, like they have that experience and stuff, versus like a teenager. And I guess like what he's trying to say is with like our distraction and stuff, it's like, are we ever going to reach that level of maturity or levels of maturity that are going to, give us that. Also going with like back to like the culture thing, like, and how it shapes us. We discussed a little bit about language and how like the words that we use, like the context are demonstrate, like are used, like we use those based on like our experience, or like maybe like words influence how we see things. So like that's another thing to really take into account, just like how we're situated and how like that usage works.
I think the maturity thing that you mentioned would be interesting to see, like if this book were to be written 5 years from now, like how would that differ? Just because like pretty much I would say like anyone that's not in college now, like younger, their ability to focus is a lot different than what ours is, and ours is obviously a lot different than what our parents is. So like in the future, if something here kind of doesn't shift and the maturity level isn't reached, like it would be interesting to see, okay, so if you were a teenager in the 60s, how's that different than if you were a teenager right now? Just because like their focus was a lot different than what our focus is, just because they didn't have all of their distractions were a lot different than Snapchat and Instagram. So I guess like it's interesting to think about how that's going to shift, and like does the level of maturity drop whenever people that are 16 now are 25? Like what does that look like? I think is something interesting to think about, just because their context is going to be a whole lot different than like the context of a 25-year-old now.
Well, I definitely think that like our individuality is like tied into like the amount of focus we have. Like a loss of focus is pretty much the same thing as like a loss of individuality.
Yeah, and I guess it's like kind of like also what we do in our free time. Like we have like the experience with our leisure activities as like a thing to like better ourselves and stuff. And then I guess like the opposite of that would be like going down like a YouTube hole.
Yeah.
And stuff like that kind of boredom.
Yeah, there was like whenever you guys were talking about being like juvenile and everything, like Crawford says like that there's a difference between the adult will and the juvenile will. And I think there was one part in the book where he said that he sees like, privileged and entitled beings populating the world that have not had their will shaped by their experience. So I think that's like kind of what you were saying about how like the differentiation between like maybe our parents or like our grandparents and like how they understand things versus how we understand things. And what's really funny is that my dad was like going through his high school yearbook, and so I was looking at it too, and I was like, oh my god, like you guys were 18 years old and like you guys look like adults. And he was like, well, that's because we couldn't wait to grow up. Like, and I'm like, because in like my high school yearbook, I don't know about you guys, but like my graduating class, like we all looked like we were 12, like graduating.
We still look like
So,
that.
so like, I don't know, like what do you think that's like attributed to? Like just our experiences, or like Crawford mentioned like other things too, like how, like especially like our generation and like generations after us, like he mentioned like Mickey Mouse, like the
mouse
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, the thing that always like has what they need ready for them. Like, do you think like because of how technology is changing and just like how like, I think there's a difference between how, like, we were raised and how our parents were raised. So, like, do you think, like, just that differentiation between the two time periods, like, that's what's causing this, or?
Partially, yes. I feel like we can look at it two ways that we've looked at class the entire time of like, it's a help and it's a hindrance. It's a hindrance because in like Mickey Mouse world, everything is handed to you, so you don't really have to like think for yourself if you let it get to that point. But I think it's also a help because like in doing our leisure projects, I had no idea how to start my project. Like, so I did like latte art, so I've seen baristas do it, but like watching YouTube videos or like having the easy access to like the help was nice, and it's not something that my parents would have had. But in the same time, like I guess if you shift it to school, you can easily cheat the system as much as you want and then get nothing out of it and just like have your hand held the entire time. So I think it could potentially be a help if you take it that way, but it could also lead you to like being stuck in this like almost baby mode the rest of your life if you push it to an extreme, kind of like in like tetrads what we talk about.
Yeah, I think it depends on the person, because like what you're saying, like some people could take like the information, everything we have, and like learn from it and actually develop their own opinions about things, or some people could just like follow what everybody else is saying without even like getting into it and say like, okay, the majority's saying this, I'm gonna go with this, and like not really have an individual opinion about something.
That kind of goes into like, we discussed this in class, like actually reading the book versus just spark notes, you know, or just skimming, like are you actually getting the full experience out of the text?
And we kind of like touched on it, but like, what do you guys think about like the jig, the nudge, the cultural jig? Like, I think we said like they were like social engineering, I don't know what the word is, like tools. So like, are they actually helping us find our individuality, or are they just, we're like indirectly being like socially engineered through those cultural jigs, because, or jig, nudge, and cultural jig? Because I think we talked about in class, he gave an example of what a cultural jig would be, which is what we think of like American patriotism, like that's cultural in our society, and that helps form, you know, what some of our values or morals would be in regards to, you know, like our country and everything like that. So like, I would think that that's like social engineering, you know. So do we think that's actually like helping us find our individuality, or are we just becoming products of those social engineering tactics?
I mean, I think it could kind of go either way, but I feel like he said, like the culture really does shape to like who we are and stuff. Now, I guess there is an extent to which that can go. Like, I guess if you were to take like maybe like social media culture and now want to be like you know, like an Instagram model and stuff like that might be that might be like, you know, like you're really trying to be that, but I think there's a difference between that and just having like your culture.
And also, I think you can find.
Trying to think.
Yeah,
No, I think
that
makes sense.
Does that make sense?
No, it definitely.
I don't know, just like going off of that, I think that like you can find individuality within that jig, but like I don't know, there's little different sectors of like, you know, who you vote for politically, or like where you go to church, or like all that sort of stuff. Like it just, I think it separates it. It's like when you have like Roman numerals, like, you know, it's like there's a big paper and then you have the Roman numerals and then you have the little, like inside of that you have like a little lowercase a, where you can kind of like get more into like figuring out who you are.
And going back to the politics thing, it's like what I was saying. So like some people will have opinions and they could like do research and stuff, but then some people just like go off what other people say.
Yeah.
And like that's part
And
of
we
it.
talked about that in class, like just using it as, like just talking about it as to, you know, as a conversation, like not even being like informed.
Yeah, exactly.
At all.
I think going into like the nudge, from how we talked about it in class and kind of how Crawford writes about it, it's definitely leaning more towards the social engineering side, because it's like we know how people will act, so then we'll tweak it this way so that we can like capture them even more, sort of thing. Like I feel like the jig is a little bit different, and the nudge is kind of really like hitting on that social, like it's built for you or built to sway you in that way. And then obviously, I don't know, I like a cultural nudge, I think shifts that even more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the nudge is more like, I don't even know if it's the right way of looking at it. Nudge is more like external, I guess, and like the jig is more like self-created.
I feel like that makes sense, just
Makes
because like the cultural jig obviously is like almost self-created, because like our cultural jig is going to be like, if we want to look at it this way, like Duquesne. So like we're gonna take the experience and kind of make it how we want it to be, but the nudge is kind of more like like we were pushed to go to college, I guess, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, and then I guess circling back to the end, we kind of hit on it a little bit, but bringing Cardinal Sarah's conversation into this, I think you made a good point at the beginning, Olivia, of like, Crawford does hit on silence and like the need for silence, but Sarah's silence is different.
Yeah.
And so and like the last question that we talked about at the beginning is Crawford's argument an adequate solution to the attention crisis, or is developing a relationship with silence also necessary to solving the problem? And so I guess from my perspective, I think Crawford's argument helps, but I think like everything that we've read, it's not like an end all be all, this is gonna save the universe. And I think developing the two kinds of relationships with silence, one where it's self-reflective and doing something, but one where you're not doing anything like Sarah's and like really focusing. I think they're both necessary to solve the problem. I don't think it's like an if, like, or a either or, like you need both.
They're
Yeah,
different, but you need both.
Yeah.
You need like, you need both forms of silence, and like, it's just like, I guess like, kind of what Crawford says is like that idea of excellence, or just trying to be like a better person. It doesn't have to necessarily be like, I want to be the best of the best. It can simply be like, I just want to better myself, to better myself. And, but I also feel like an important aspect of that is the silence that Sarah describes, because like a lot of people look to religion to be better people, and like look for that kind of silence as like a sort of reflection, because like you can, there's like again, there's like two different types of reflection. You can reflect on like, okay, well I didn't do it very well in this situation for like something like cooking, or like I did swimming, but then you can also look at it like, oh wow, like I wasn't a very good person here, like how can I do better?
Right, it's like silence is like formed in its own experience kind of thing, because your silence reflecting of like how you're treating humanity is going to be a lot different than your silence reflecting of how was my stroke.
Also, I also feel like the silence that Sarah also describes kind of goes into like that culture and how culture influences us, because it's religion. Like it kind of goes into the religious aspect, and there are so many religions that like, or like most of them, like they kind of like stress that importance of that need for reflection. Like there's always moments of quiet time for that kind of thing.
Right, and it kind of focuses too on like if you, he was more so in reflection of like Catholicism and Christianity is like a whole, like if you don't have that silence, then like you kind of become your own God. And it was talking about like how the modern man is like so stuck in like the technical age that that's more so like becoming their God. And so if you don't have that silence, or you're always focused on like, it's like throw out your TV because it's like kind of brainwashing you. Like if you don't have that, then you lack building the relationship that you're hoping to build with like what like your religious.
You're losing some
goal.
Kind of guidance.
Yeah, because you're being guided by technology and the systematic hand, I guess.
You're not really like even using your free will to decide what you want to do. Well, you are in a way, but like you're actually like being controlled at the end of the day.
Right, it's like a controlled free will.
Yeah, so I was definitely talking about, like I think there was even a point in the reading where he brought in like the Bible verse where the apostles are asking Jesus like, how should we pray? Like teach us how to pray. And he told them like, go in your room, shut the door, and like that's where you do it in complete silence, complete solitude. And I definitely think like those, like just echoing what you all said, that's definitely needed, an aspect that is part of the solution to the attention crisis, where we do need to find leisure activities where I think in most situations, in silence where we're doing something, and then also in more of the contemplative silence. I think we can, form our individuality, especially like if you're someone who's religious, like having that quiet time where you're just in reflection or even prayer, like that can even, help develop who you are as an individual. And then obviously through our leisure projects, that's another aspect where our individuality was formed.
Yeah, sorry, I just have a few things that she said. She also, she states that, the real questions in life are posed in silence. And she's,
It's
cardinal.
So
yeah, it's Cardinal Seurat.
Thank you, yeah. He also states, this is like a time of continual movement, like restlessness, and we're we have the risk of doing for the sake of doing, and not so much just, for that, and like resisting temptation by trying to be before trying to do, and then kind of just, he stated like every day is important to be silent so as to determine the outlines of one's future actions, and without silence, we're incapable of hearing, loving, and understanding people, and we need that silence to understand them. So.
I think to even time, rewind a little bit, the detox, Dr. Wax had said, people had said in their detox that they used to pray every morning, but then they didn't anymore because they got, sucked into the world of their phone and their technology. So in wanting to find that silence, like Sarah said, it's kind of going with what Crawford said of, not necessarily ditching the guy that is technology, but taking a step back and being able to close the door and have complete silence and not be distracted by everything that's been guiding us to what our culture is today. So it's obviously they talked about the beginning of class, everything in this class is this weird puzzle that mixes together, but this really did take everything, and from detox day one to now, all fits together of we have to kind of find a balance, or else we're going to be nudged into what the upper hand the big brother wants us to do.
Well, yeah, this is kind of a dumbed down way to think about it, but say you just go to work, or you just go to school, and then right after you just get on your phone, and you're looking through Netflix or whatever, the whole day you're just being busy on what you're doing on your phone, and you have no time to self-reflect of what you did your entire day, and if you keep doing that every day, all your days start to blend together, and it's okay, well, what am I even doing in my life? You know what I mean? I'm just
you forget what you learned,
exactly.
You forget what you did that day.
You turn into an android. So
Maybe that's a good segue.
I was gonna say,
yeah.
All right, so
do they dream of electric sheep?
Maybe if you watched enough Netflix. But okay, number 2, discuss your reaction to Blade Runner 2049 and do androids dream of electric sheep. In particular, address how these stories distinguish and or blur the distinction between humans and artificial intelligence, androids. What standards of quality should be used to distinguish between the appearance of humanness and real humanness. So I guess we'll start with reactions to both the movie and the book.
If I didn't read the book, I would have been kind of lost in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
I was just watching him okay, if I didn't read the book, I would have no clue what's going on right now.
It was slow.
Yeah, it was really slow. There was so many cardinals, there were so many periods of silence where it was just music, no one was talking, yeah.
And then even when they did talk,
it was so slow.
What it was discussing.
I did though how I think the movie helped me, because when I was reading the book, I was thinking in my mind I'm so tainted to think androids, robot looking things, but in the movie obviously that wasn't the case. It was these androids, but they would slice them open and blood would go everywhere because they did a lot of that.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
But I think it helps me, I'm glad we read the book first, but watching the movie helps me picture the book a lot more.
Yeah, going off of that, how did the movie kind of change your image that you had from the book? When I saw the dust thing, then I guess the environment that they were in wasn't necessarily something that I how they portrayed it in the film was completely different. How
Yeah, 'cause there was still, like, a
it
big
was more
city.
spaced out than I had imagined, and then with the dust and the kibble. I
It's
also
way more like dystopian kind of a feel.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what struck me too was during the film, like just like Joe's house. I can't remember his number. I'm not good with numbers. Joe's.
I'm sorry,
They just call it K.
K.
Yeah.
K. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, K something. Like just how like kind of bare it was compared to where Deckard was staying, and like there was just like so much like decoration,
Yeah, and, like, opulence.
ornamentation. Yeah, yeah. It was kind of interesting to see that like contrast. And I think that I don't know that was just something that like I didn't really like I kind of thought about when I was reading the book. Like I imagined like there being really nothing, but like the things that were left were still very.
Mhm.
I found it was interesting how like some of the androids, like his wife or whatever, like she was a hologram, but then like whenever they were in like the headquarters, like that woman like came out of whatever and
That
like
plastic
that
bag.
plastic bag,
Yeah.
and she was like flesh and blood, like whenever he like cut her open. So I think it was really strange how like there was kind of like that both different types of androids, or maybe one was like
Like they look
I
real.
don't know.
Yeah.
They looked real, but it was, I don't know. I don't know if like the wife was like an older model and then like that woman was like a newer model where.
Yeah, cause she, yeah.
It just seemed like like weird how like there was two different completely types of androids.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing too that was big for me was in the book, in the way that we talked about it, it made the androids seem, I think, more distinct because, what was her name, the first girl? Like she was an android and it was like made very apparent, but even Kay's wife hologram thing, like once she was real, it was hard to tell that like she wasn't
Right, when she came,
a hologram anymore. And so I think maybe it's just because like the way we almost like we overanalyzed the book in class, like we talked about it so much that it was apparent that Iran, that was her name, that like she was fake, that wasn't real, but like in the movie, even hologram wife lady whose name I can't remember. Joy. Yeah. Like she, like it seemed like there was like she loved him. Like it seemed like she cared about him, whether that was her program or not. I think it was a lot harder to distinguish in the movie. Like there wasn't like a fine line of like you're real, you're not. It was like and technically Kay wasn't real. Like and we thought for a long time he was because of his memories,
but the feelings were real between them, which is really weird.
So like do androids have feelings?
Yeah. Can they break through their programming and make emotional connections?
I actually think he was real in that. That's what I was thinking. So like because if you think about it, if he was able to reason, right? He had memories, and he at the end of the day he did have free will. And remember at the end when he was what's it called? She was looking at his memories, but it was happening. It looked like it was happening at the same time.
Oh yeah.
So it was almost like she was trying to convince him that he wasn't human. So like to go along with the whole thing. I don't know.
So many potential.
So many possibilities.
That was kind of a thing that like we talked a lot about like I'm trying to think like that idea of memory and stuff, and like I've just been trying to like I was just thinking like do you, like how like you know like that memory obviously impacted Joe to act in this situation.
I feel like the only time he was acting like a robot was when he was almost going along with everybody what he was supposed to be doing.
Yeah, like when he was given orders by Robin Weiss. I forget her name, but her character.
Like one of the I'm trying to find like I had like quotes and stuff. I guess I'm just trying to figure out like why did he have the memory in the first place if it wasn't his?
Yeah.
Like it was to protect the girl. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But also it's just like
That's what I
they
mean, I feel like
included
it was
so
his
much
memory.
of the memory as well.
Yeah.
And another thing was they discussed like how memory like emotion brings up a memory and stuff. So like you could really see that in the film because whenever like there was like a certain like emotion that he felt or he saw something, like the memory would just like pop up again.
And I think it go.
Oh, sorry. And even sometimes, like, whenever you feel, like, certain emotions, like, not even that you have a memory, but, like, you just come up with, like, a scenario in your head where, like, that emotion could be felt again. So, like, I don't know, like, how much of that was actually, like, his memory, and how much of that is something that, I don't know, maybe he saw somewhere else, and he was just picturing something else in his mind, I don't know.
I was just gonna say, even with the whole emotion thing, like I think it's interesting that in Androids, like the book, the only time that like I felt like there was real emotion was when it was about animals.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
robotic animals. Like
Right.
he cared so much about that stupid owl, but like he didn't care really about like his actual love life or like finding real people. That was never like really
Yeah.
a central focus. It was kind of
Yeah.
and like talking about animals was how they did the test. So like I just think it's weird that in the movie it was definitely focused on like real human relationships, and in the book I feel like it wasn't.
Yeah, why do we think that is? Like maybe like, I don't know, like you see like the animal commercials, like, oh, you're gonna let this dog starve,
Yeah.
whatever, like why do we sympathize so much
Obviously
more
the
with
angel plays in the
animals?
background.
Yeah, right? Like why do we sympathize so much more with animals than we do with like actual human beings? Like, is it because animals, like, even though there's like some like scientific studies that say they do have like conscience and everything like that, like we do too. So like why favor the dog over, you know, some homeless people?
This might be weird, but like, you know, I really don't think animals can really wrong us like humans. Well, at least not like humans can.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, they
a
can
dog
bite
can
us,
bite
yeah.
you, but like, you know, it can't
Some
like
could kill you.
stab you in the back. That is true. There's some big
That
dogs.
is true.
But
But like
like,
there's no like preemption, like
Yeah,
how humans
exactly.
would have.
It
I
is
guess.
interesting though that you guys are talking about that because it's so culturally fixed. Because for us we're like, oh, puppies, but in some like Asian countries they're eating dogs.
Yeah.
So like it's definitely
Yeah.
something that is like we're tainted in a way to think of like little kids love guinea pigs, and other countries people are eating guinea pigs.
Right.
Like it's so.
no, it's definitely a diverse culture.
So I don't know. I don't get it, but I think it was interesting to see that at least from my opinion, the book, that's how they humanized people, was like their love of animals, and maybe it's because animals are helpless and they can't really do
And
anything.
I mean, that might not be it. That's just like
But it could be something.
theory.
Who knows what Philip K. Dick was doing? But
Yeah. So what do you think of like the test? Like in the book, it was like the Comm test where they were asking the questions, and then it was based on how like neurologically like they would respond, and then like I don't know. Okay, so the test that like the baseline or whatever, like Kay had to go through, like where he was in that strange room.
Oh, yeah, he was
had to-
repeating the
Yeah, he
words.
was repeating the
and
words.
they were scanning his eye.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it was weird because like there was like one set of words, and then there was like something else like beneath that, like
It was
I was
very patterned,
confused. Yeah,
which is
like-
something that we talked about
Yeah.
in class. Like it was just like say this in response to this.
Like, I wonder if, like, because, like, he was, like, an android, like, maybe, like, he could only hear the one part as opposed to, like, the other part that was being said, or.
It might have
I'm
even
not
been like
sure how that-
I think
inflection
it was,
of like
like,
how he said
programming.
and like timing of like his response, because it was like if he was off, the machine caught it.
Yeah.
And in the scan where he was off and they're like your numbers are whatever whacked out,
Yeah.
it was because he had said like, well, I just killed a person or whatever, and he like you could tell he was pausing differently than the first time that he did it when he said whatever.
He
The
also
fact
had
that he
that.
could be off is almost like he's
Yeah, it's
human,
very
right?
strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also has to do with the fact of like how the memory influenced him.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're like, I feel like they were conditioning him the whole time to feel like he was a robot almost.
Yeah.
In the void comp test, it was kind of the same thing, and like it would gauge her like reaction.
Responses
Yeah,
in a way.
which I think my guess is like the movie's take on what that was, because it's based off of it. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
so then I guess like what we talked about this a lot in class of like what standards distinguish between the appearance of humanness and real humanness, and obviously like biggest most blatant one is like internal components, which again in the movie was hard to distinguish because they're slicing
Right.
everyone open and stuff's flying everywhere, and it's not like when I pictured it in the book I was like screws and like computers,
Yeah.
and like in the movie the one guy with the flashy eyes had like the chip between behind his ear, but like other than that and like their serial number on the inside you wouldn't be able to tell.
But even like today, like that's so hard to tell because like people get like their shoulders replaced or their knees replaced, like internal components, like they can be robotic themselves. So it's like, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
I don't know.
One of the biggest things obviously that we hit on is like the ability to empathize. If you can empathize, clearly you're
It's
human.
yeah.
But if you can't empathize, clearly you're not.
Yeah.
I think it's just interesting that the movie definitely blurred those lines because we're like, what about Kay? What about
Yeah.
Joy? Like,
To what
Take on
extent do their
emotions and
emotions,
everything.
yeah,
and then one thing that I picked up on too is like, one, they talked about in both the book and the movie, like AI never ages, never tires, which
Yeah.
they talked about with like people on the radio, like they never, or TV or whatever the guy was watching, they never like paused, really, they never like stopped, and they never lacked information. And AI can kind of morph into whatever the situation requires. So whether that be like the memories, like their memories can be morphed into whatever is needed via that girl. But real humans obviously were tied to the culture that we're raised in. So like I can't magically remember what Steph thought of at her 6th birthday party, but like in that movie you could, because the girl's just feeding you memories.
Kind of going off a little bit, but one thing that I, like going back to like the animals and stuff, like they couldn't recognize death. Like they're like when he was like, when that one animal died and he just wasn't sure, like that was just something that wasn't very, like, I don't know, I just thought that was interesting.
And to go with that though, like also real humanness is more precious than AI, because for them it's another machine, like so what, it's cheap, we can make another one. And it's almost like they're enslaved to their designer, and so like they're programmed to not think about it, but like for us, that's a big deal. If something dies, we're devastated. And also like it's devastating because it's precious and it's not something that can be remade.
I know, like in class we talked about like Dr. Walks, like his triad of what it means to be human, like with the understanding, will, and memory, and then also like empathy as well. And I just personally, I think it's really hard to distinguish, like especially in how like androids have been portrayed in the book and in the movie, like because there's so many similarities. Like obviously we know that they're different, but like how can you tell like they're different? Because you know, Kay had memories, you know, like we said with the girl who came out of the plastic bag, like she had, you know, what we would think would be normal internal components and everything. I think like we're just progressing so much in by way of technology that like we are like gonna really have a hard time like distinguishing
Between appearance and reality.
Yeah.
What else? What did you guys think about like the role of silence throughout the text and stuff? You know, like 'cause it did have like a big role in that aspect.
It was definitely a lot of like the whole contemplation thing, and like they like said like the TV couldn't be turned off because it like was the only way that they can focus, kind of thing, which I think is interesting because since they are androids, they can't think for themselves, and so that's the only thing that like would keep them going. And in the movie, it was interesting, like you said, there was a whole lot of silence, which I think was the point of this. But they couldn't really function, or like they would malfunction if there was silence. So it was interesting that way.
Only
And just kind of like in contrast, like so I forget his name, but like he was always in silence because he was just there by himself, and then he was able to recognize just like I'm John, just just the fact that like one person was there and stuff, and like I think that kind of I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say and stuff, but like he had that silence. I don't know how, you know what I'm trying to get at, like just how like that was like a different.
I don't know. Would you guys think that like the empathy box, like or the whatever they like held the handles or whatever in the book, like do you think like that could be kind of like parallel to like what our contemplation would be, like because if you think about it, like at least from what I imagine, like they're like holding onto the handles or something, and then like I don't know if it's like a screen or if it's just something they're imagining or something. Like that's what I think they're doing. So like in that time, like their bodies like are silent, like they are like just contemplating, I guess, but like they're going through something like internally, you know, like I don't know. So maybe like that is like their silence, their contemplation. I don't know.
But like they can't do it by themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost like they're so reliant on the box, whereas we can lock ourselves in a room
Yeah.
and hopefully be able to contemplate things. But I think that kind of covers everything there. Right? I guess one thing we didn't hit on was phronesis. Androids lack phronesis, or like the practical wisdom that humans would have. So in the movie, it was they just followed orders, and they never really thought or second guessed anything.
Yeah, that kind of goes into like the morality thing. Stuff that we
Yeah, like they were
discussed.
lacking that.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to hit on that though because we talked about phronesis for a lot of
Yeah.
class.
Yeah, what if that goes along with like context, like knowing the context of something. That's something that Dr. Walk said about humor, like humans get context, androids don't, so having the practical wisdom to know what the context is, I guess.
Yeah, just one more thing, just like kind of listing random, like they stated like dying for the right cause is like the most human thing we can do.
Right.
And so I just thought that.
And like in the movie, almost there was never you could figure out what the right cause really was.
Yeah.
Because you really couldn't tell. Like there was bad guys and badder guys. Like I could never tell who was supposed to be like the true good people, just because they were all killing everyone. Like, and it didn't really matter. And the guy at the beginning that eye got ripped out of his head. Like
That was,
Oh,
it was hard for me to get into the movie because that was the
like
opening
the actor's
scene.
Dave Bautista.
yeah, like he was supposed to kind of be
He's a
right. He's in Avengers.
Yeah.
No. They had, what's his name in it too? They had some big.
Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling and then,
Super hot. Super hot.
Is that what you guys
No,
thought?
there's another guy, the guy with the eyes. Is his name Jared? Jared Leto?
Jared Leto.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Jared
Jared
Leto.
Leto.
He was in it too.
The Joker.
There's
Not as hot, but.
I'm glad that's what you got. Alright, so are we good on androids and their humanness and lack thereof?
Yeah, we covered that
Sweet.
pretty good.
Alright, last one. Building upon the discussion emerging from questions 1 and 2, analyze the arguments made and all watched over by machines of love and grace, part 3, the monkey and the machine and the monkey. Who say that 5 times fast? Are human beings simply just self-reproducing autonoma machines, animals, or a collection of genes? Or is there something more to who we are? How do you explain the parentheses, non or existence of good, and most importantly, evil? Either way, what are the implications of these answers? The best answer will be able to bring Cardinal Sarah into the conversation, whether in agreement or disagreement. So, I guess just starting off, like obviously, they like jump the gun like at the beginning of like, here's what Hamilton did, here's all of his stuff, here's what he believed, retracted, re-believed. I don't know, the guy confused me. Because I think he himself was confused. But he obviously his biggest thing was like he thought we were like endless machines that just repeated throughout history and truly never died, and that our genes were just passed down from generation to generation, and like the way that like almost Darwinism worked was that we just like grew, our genes shifted and morphed rather than like human beings actually living out a life and doing things for themselves. It was for the betterment of the gene.
Yeah, the gene was kind of like our building block. I mean, it obviously is, but like I don't think not in the way that he was thinking of it. Like he was thinking it more in terms of like, you know, we're robots, and that's like our main component where like that's what we have to pass down when we self-replicate. That's how he said.
He tried to quantify
yeah,
all
Yeah,
genes
and he tried
Yes.
looking at like the patterns and like almost like it was a computer code kind of thing.
Yeah.
And this goes back to Homo Days with are we more than our biological makeup?
Right.
And like if so, like what else do we have?
Yeah, there was like all of the background, like historical information about how, like the coltan, like that was like the mineral that they wanted to harvest from, it was Congo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
from Congo, and how, like, I mean, just trying to get that was totally devastating to the area and to the people there. You know, like the Civil War, and like these companies got involved and, you know, and tried to get in with, like, you know, the local affairs and everything, and it just was absolutely terrible. Like, there was one part where they did, like, they showed like a news clip where it was saying like, oh yeah, there was this massacre today.
But it didn't affect our
but
company.
how did it affect our company and everything? And like, we're pleased to report these revolts did not in any way concern us.
Yeah.
Like, meanwhile.
I thought it was interesting too how like they use the argument that genes being like machines explain the idea of like martyrdom and like the whole idea of like utilitarianism of like greatest good for greatest number or whatever. Which again we've like talked about how that's not really how like humans operate, regardless of if you want to like numerically quantify it. And I just thought that there were a lot of holes in what Hamilton was trying to fight for, which then he like ended up retracting himself. I was so confused because he's like, there's not a God because it's all of these genes like replicating, but then he did believe in God and gave up everything. Like, he was confusing.
Yeah, there was also like the part like how you mentioned like with martyrdom and how like why do people feel the need for like self-sacrificing and like at one point he was like, well, that's how the best genes like, you know, come along and get passed down and everything. But then like some people like that's not their reason for self-sacrifice. Like if it's like me and my family and you know we have guns trained at us, like I would put myself in front of them, you know what I mean? Like that has not like, you know, their genes are better than mine, so like I mean that just didn't really make sense, you know.
I thought it was interesting too, they like talked about that whole idea of like the selfish gene and that's why people murder, and that's like the blame that they have for certain people being quote unquote bad or evil, which I kind of counteracts everything that we've talked about of like evil does exist, but I wouldn't blame it on a gene.
Right.
Exactly.
And I also don't think, and bringing in Sarah, would blame it on a gene either, because he said at one point, modern man doesn't consider sin, but rather sick, which I think is like that idea of like modernism, and Hamilton's argument was trying to say like it was a sickness in the genes, and it's not necessarily the idea of sin, which is kind of like what Sarah was totally against. He was saying this is what like society is going towards, but that's not right.
Yeah, and especially like from like a religious context that Sarah was going from, like when we talk about sin, like there's always like, you go to confession and you have penance and everything and you're reconciled of your sins and everything. And I definitely think like, I don't know, like at least in my opinion, like I don't think that's based off of bad genes that, you had, bad upbringing or, bad experiences.
It's formed by your culture.
It's formed by culture. So I think, definitely formed by culture.
Even that, so, okay, so the machines and us, like, the thing that separates us both is that, like, if, like you're saying, like, good and evil, which is, like, we have a spirit. So, like, if we didn't have since we have a spirit that allows us to, like, act good and evil, but, like, a computer, something that's just biological made up, can't, like, do that. You know what I mean?
It was interesting too, they made the claim, once they tied in Price's arguments, that we were all just like tiny portions of a machine working together to make, like just all pieces as a part of the whole, and that the eternal soul went beyond us and like computer code could never be ended, which I think is interesting because, looking at the religious like cardinal contradiction, he says like throughout the entire thing that our future is in God's hands. It's not necessarily an endless code kind of thing, and it's not something that we can control or the tiny pieces or humans would like have an impact on kind of thing. It's not like we're gonna die and pass everything that we have down to the next person. Like that's not how I think that argument would tie in.
Sorry, I'm trying to gather my thoughts.
I know they bring in like the poem, I think it was by Thompson, like The Hound of Heaven, and how you were saying like at first he was against God and now he's with God, like because he was saying how like we're always running from God, but he will always catch up with us and possess our souls. Like I don't know, like maybe that could have been like his experience, like at first he, you know, just disregarded it, and then like maybe something happened where, you know,
He felt
maybe
like
he found God or found like that's
Yeah,
a
his
real
breakthrough
thing.
that could only be given by God.
Mhm. And then maybe that could, you know, just how he tied in, you know, his experience.
Yeah, kind of tying, like they stated like the equations have like enormous implications, for like us, because it kind of, it took away that, like if we're just composed by genes, it took away like that religion, like with the moral guidance and stuff, like it, so, like, and then like he mentions in here that like, sorry, like we've kind of like it's mentioned that we've kind of left religion behind and we have forgot, like we've lost that sense of sin and stuff.
And then I think like all three of them, Price, Hamilton, and Dawkins, I think his name is, like they mention how, like in the documentary, how they reinvented the mortal soul, and like it was the soul that is actually the part that lives on. So maybe not necessarily our genes, but like our soul, our immortal soul. So like, yeah, I feel like something definitely happened where like, you know, they had some sort of enlightenment, like so like there was just no other explanation because they were
They
so
like ditched
against
everything
it.
and they were like,
And,
wait a second.
Yeah, like there's something more, like it's not just artificial, there's something that's within each of us that's unique, distinct, and like that's what's going to be left behind after we're gone.
Maybe they experienced like that you, like just kind of like you can't quantify.
Yeah, which I think would answer the question, like, we are more than just self-reproducing machine animal collection of genes. Like, clearly, although we didn't really get their explanation of what they thought, like they found like we are more than just a code. And then I think in that would also explain that there is the existence of good and evil, but it's not defined by genes. It's something else. Which, if you want to look at like the Cardinals' argument, would be like the notion of religion and God and all of that kind of thing. But obviously, it's not. We're not just like passing on genes and then the end.
Right.
Anything else?
I
Oh,
think
one
this was definitely the hardest film to, like there's just a lot going on.
Yeah, they talked about like Rwandan genocide and Congo.
And they bounce around a lot.
Yeah, this was kind of like the whole find the pattern that we've been talking about. It was just interesting though at the end how I'm talking about like of this one, how in Sarah says like in the highly technical and busy world, how can we find silence? And I thought it was interesting because in All Watched Over, like silence wasn't a thing. They were kind of more focused on the busy and being controlled by the guiding hand and like all of that stuff. And if it's the genes, then like it doesn't matter what we do.
Yeah.
I also
Often
find-
say like free will is exaggerated and we're controlled by logic that's on board computers within us.
Yeah, they call us like soft machines.
Yeah.
I find it.
I think there's a difference between like manipulation and like free will. Like if something like tells you to do something, you still have the opportunity to do it or not. But if you do it because it's so, or the world's doing whatever everybody's doing or whatever, like you're getting forced to do it almost, like without like them actually grabbing you and making you do it, it's more like manipulation than free will. So.
Yeah, for sure. I found it interesting how like they showed like, you know, the destruction, the devastation like after like a whole village was wiped out and everything. Like
With Rwandan genocide, I forget, like, if you've ever seen Hotel Rwanda, it kind of like puts it into perspective of like the millions of people that were just slaughtered. That's not a gene.
Yeah, I think the yeah, right. I think the figure they said in the.
And if it was, you just take a pill, right?
Right.
Or something, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the figure they said was like 4.5 million people like, in the span of like 4 or 5 years. That was crazy. So like, I don't know, like what was left behind, like it was like actual like decaying bodies, like their clothes were still on them, and it's like, yeah, there's definitely more that's like left behind than other than the gene.
And I think that alone kind of shows that evil does exist. If you
Yeah,
don't
for
think that's
sure.
evil, then like,
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And what's even more evil is, the people, like companies and, all the countries
They
that were involved
dehumanize
down there.
everything.
They dehumanize everything, and like they knew what was going on, and like I think this happened, during Bill Clinton's administration, I think.
Rwanda?
I wanna say it was, I think it might be, but, because I think there was something like this was, I can't even remember how long ago it was, but we were talking about this.
Yeah, it was
And,
94.
okay, yeah, and like he said, like that was like his biggest regret of his administration, not, doing anything about it.
Mhm.
So, I mean, evil could exist in the people who actually facilitated it, like whether directly or indirectly.
I thought it was interesting too, like, kind of with what you said with like the companies in Congo, like, it was almost like they put a price tag on like people saying, and it was like, well, this stopped our production, so like, it's a problem now, but not like, this killed so many people, like, it's a problem
Right.
now. And
Yeah.
so it was like, sad to see how they like, removed the identity that people had. And so in that respect, that's kind of like they were just looking at them like genes, but obviously that wasn't the case and had a huge impact on history and culture and the way that we think of things.
Yeah, how they phrased it in that newscast that they showed was like it in no way concerns us.
Yeah.
Well, what about, like our morality as human beings, like how does that not concern us?
Like we
You know,
should be
people are-
helping.
right.
And it's just the trajectory of the future. Who knows what those people that died could have done and impacted the world. Like, it does affect us in some way, shape, and form.
Yeah, we can't just let
Yeah,
that
for
go.
sure. Like, why are we so appalled by like what happened during the Holocaust and then what happened here? Like, not like necessarily equating the two, but like similar situations and where people throughout the world were involved in everything. And in one situation, something was done about it, but in the other situation, not so much.
Yeah, it was kind of like just brushed under the rug,
Mhm.
like, oh, like, hiccup in history, like, push it
Yeah,
away kind of
right.
thing. But I think it just all shows that, like, yeah, we're more than genes, and yeah, it's not just like a malfunction or a miscode, like, it's a problem. And, I think in all of that, like, Sarah's kind of thing of like, if we don't have contemplation, if we don't have silence, we kind of morph into like this monster or like controlled being and can't be self-functioning and really
Just
can't accomplish what
conforms
we're
to everybody.
yeah. What do we think? We good?
I don't think we should drag it out.
Yeah.
It'll probably get worse.
Yeah.
All right, well,